welcome to the Board of Education workshop. Step 15. Call to order. Okay, we're calling it to order, and I'm gonna. Yes, it is. Is it not close enough? Okay, so we're ready to begin, and I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Malloy.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to move this mic very close so I can whisper into the microphone. What we have today for our workshop is a considerable amount of data and some analysis of that data. And I want to remind our board members that this is a discussion for us to get a sense of your perspective related to what you see and hear. And obviously, if any action needs to be taken, it would be in a board meeting and not here. So the goal of today is for us to share what has happened in the fall with 3 different thought exchanges. Parent caregiver was first, staff was second, students were third, and all of the data is here. And I'm also going to start by saying that every piece of information connected to the thought exchange process will also be on web for our community to be able to see every comment and every note so that that is all very clear. We're going to pause for the pledge.
I flipped the page and realized we were going to do the pledge. So after that quick intro, let's stand and do the pledge. Thank you.
It's very sweet. Okay, so we're going to jump right in. So as our board knows, our strategic direction drives our work. And in order for us to do our work effectively, our community has to understand what it is that we're doing, why we're doing it, how we're doing it, and then what accountability measures we're using to ensure that we have succeeded in what we said we are doing. And we remain committed to this. And I've said since I arrived here in the district, a strategic plan is not a laminated poster. It changes and evolves with what we learn. And part of that learning comes from engagements like this one. I'm not going to go through what we all know about our commitment, but I will say that when I use kind of the overarching theme of broadening the definition of success on a foundation of academic excellence, and we define success the way we do in that right-hand column, that part of our work continues to get positive resonance. Where the challenge may become, and you'll see in the data, is how we go about doing that. And I think that this information will assist us to focus our work as we go forward. But again, this at least is something that I believe our community has seen and understands at least the high level pieces. Academic excellence, people fine. The notion of kids being happy, healthy human beings, a lot of people agree with that, probably all. Kids loving their learning, some might think that's important, others maybe not so much. And then when we get into the notion of how social emotional well-being fits into this deep learning work, what deep learning is at all, and why we would consider equity and what does that mean. So what I've learned to do in our district is to try to speak in language that doesn't confuse people. So when I say to anyone who asks, why are you doing equity work? Okay, do we agree that every kid should be successful? Yes, nobody disagrees. Giving each student what they need, when they need it, and how they need it. We still on the same page? Yes. Okay, then that means we have to do some things differently because not everybody has that. Or we might say all kids need to be safe, respected, and included. Not a soul disagrees. Some of our kids feel that way. And here's the data. We can't do things the same way if some of our kids feel that way. But the key to our strategic work is nobody has to lose by us trying to lean in where kids might need something. And for whatever reason, there's a bit of that zero-sum game going on that we're going to have to wrestle with. Why somebody has to lose while we're actually helping all kids achieve. But that we'll talk about in a bit. So it's important that I share that thought exchange is one method. There are many methods used to gather feedback. Personally, though some in our community have shared they don't love it, because there are lots and lots of comments to rate if you choose to do so, or some people feel they need to find that comment that they want to disagree with because they heard about it from someone. That's not how this technological platform works. There is an AI logarithm behind it that allows us to capture themes, insights, and ideas. But what it also does, if our community wants to really dive deeply into it, it shows where we agree and it shows where we don't agree, but it also helps to find common ground, which I'll speak about in a minute. So we have pretty significant participation. You can see our parent caregivers, the number of participants, and then just so everybody's clear, obviously there were way more ratings than there were thoughts. With our staff, again, about 800. With our students, 76. So from a statistical perspective, this is a great participation rate. I mean, I always wish for more, but it's really, really solid. And I think that's important for us to know. For the work that you're hearing about tonight, because again, there are thousands of thoughts and many of those thoughts are similar. And that probably is one of the challenging parts of the platform, because if people go and look at the thoughts first, they might be able to rank them as opposed to adding something very similar. But the good news is that the program does sift through all of those things. So we studied deeply the top 200 thoughts for each of the 3 exchanges. We've organized those thoughts and ideas in the way you're going to see it tonight. And as I said at the beginning of this presentation, all of the information will be on our website under the parent engagement page, and we'll put that out through Bright Lights. And is it called Bright Lights? Did I say that right? Friday Bright. I knew as soon as I said it, I had it wrong because it's relatively new. But we will be sure that people know exactly where to find all of the information. So if it's too small to look at, you can follow on your page. We're on page 4. We did want to give you the top thoughts from each of the thought exchanges, and then we're going to incorporate all the other themes. So when we talked to the community, there were concerns about our equity liaisons existing and wishing for those positions to be classroom teachers. There was concerns regarding when we're asking for feedback, elementary, middle, and high might have different approaches, and could you actually ask for that information in a different way? And class size is also one of the major thoughts. Our staff spoke about smaller class sizes, the need to offer more courses, and really being cognizant of how much we're asking educators to do. The students talked about more opportunities to improve their grades. They talked about school lunch, and they talked about needing to be safe and kind to others. So again, it's important that I put out for you what the top 3 in each are, but I also want to share that there were many other thoughts that ranked in a similar fashion, and we simply tried to synthesize and analyze to the best of our ability, but that'll be a part of the conversation you'll have when I finish my portion. So when we look at, and this is where there's a lot of information, okay? So I'm going to be quick in the way I speak, but again, this PowerPoint presentation is available to our public, as well as I don't need to go through each piece in detail because it'll be important for the conversation. But what we then did was to create categories to organize the information. So when we talked about the equity pillar, from our community, we learned that multiple pathways are important. Meeting the needs of all students are important. Challenging enrichment and support for all students is necessary. We learned about clearly defining equity in social emotional learning. There was comments about equal access, and there were also comments for less focus on equity. And of course, again, the postgraduate pathway expansion came through loudly and clearly from our community as well. And by the way, again, when we speak this way in this room, I sometimes get emails that we no longer care about college admission. It's a both and, I promise. It's a both and. We don't want to stop helping our kids get into college, and we want to offer other options. When we looked at the equity, the equity pillar for staff, they also spoke about celebrating learners, more pathways, success needs to be broad and inclusive, and the importance of individualized instruction for those who are following them on page 6. Continued, our staff spoke about, again, the postgraduate options. So clearly, this is a very important piece, not only for our community, but also for our staff. And that the concept of success needs to look different, and that's where our strategic directions came from. And our students spoke about feeling safe and included, respecting others, treating others fairly, and they really asked us to ensure that there is no racism in our schools. When we look to our social emotional well-being pillar and our community, they talked about eradicating bullying, dealing with drug addiction, and holding students accountable for their behavior. The community talked about it's a shared role between teachers, parents, and students. Positive relationships are needed, support, emotional well-being, kindness, and empathy. Our staff spoke about, again, accountability for behavior, as well as helping students develop character and resilience, a concern that this pressure of too many AP classes might be adding to the challenge, more counseling and resources, emotional needs may be impeding learning, and the staff shared about a focus that might be a little less on test scores. Our students spoke about feeling safe, being kind, clean bathrooms, free of unwanted behavior, bullying, fewer tardies and detentions, and they really didn't comment actually on social emotional well-being or mental health. So that theme didn't actually emerge for our students, but one could argue that feeling safe is obviously connected there. When we look to the deep learning pillar, our community talked about class size, talked about monitoring homework load, enrichment opportunities, multiple pathways again, focus on the arts, choice and voice, maintain high standards, help kids love learning. And they really did comment a lot on focusing on what can happen in class so kids didn't need tutoring. That did emerge considerably through our parent caregiver information. Our staff talked about smaller class sizes, district funded intervention specialists. And the reason for that is because many of our intervention specialists would be paid for by fundraising. Focus on the arts, add electives, real world skills, critical thinking, public speaking, and eliminate combo classes. Staff also spoke about more support, intervention, respect for all staff, not only teachers, to be sure we have realistic expectations on teachers, and again, a concern that there may be too much emphasis on some of our AP programming. Also, a desire, interestingly enough, that we provide our kids multiple ways to demonstrate their learning. Students said the same thing. Can we have more opportunities to improve our grades? So again, you're starting to hear a theme there, which is really important. How they catch up after absences, more field trips and social events, less homework, no homeworks on weekends and vacations, and more class time for assignments and homework. You know, you gotta love the kids for putting it out there. They need a little bit more free time. And our students talked about, in terms of deep learning, and this connects really importantly, more engaging work and instruction, listen to music in class, teacher summarizes and preps for tests, teachers who are friendly, engaging, patient, open-minded, and they'd like a few more breaks during the day. When we talk about shared leadership, parent involvement, this is where we got some interesting views. Balanced parent feedback, welcome all feedback, parents should engage actively, include parents in decisions. ensure transparency and trust, share protocols around decision making. When we talk about our staff, help parents shift their definition of success, help with the anxiety and pressure that is sometimes experienced that impacts our kids. And our staff talked about more opportunities to collaborate. And our students didn't really share any themes that would fall neatly under this pillar. In terms of stewardship of resources, the themes that emerged were the notion of equity liaisons, like I shared earlier, put them into the classroom as opposed to having them in the district, and the concept of recruitment and retention, hiring the staff, maintaining the staff. Our staff talked about instructional support, assistant principals, more support when we have special day classes, and other resources and behavioral support. And of course, professional development remains key. And our staff did talk about recruitment and retention, because when there is a recruitment and retention problem, obviously fewer staff means lots more stress. There's a lot more stress. And of course, the notion of keeping elementary counselors, we've already made that commitment. The concept emerged about higher pay for certain positions, which some jurisdictions have considered. There are probably some challenges to that as well. And the need for teachers and staff, and this did come through, to feel supported and valued. There is some sense of feeling there is aggression and threat in some of our communities, and that sense of feeling overwhelmed. And that is something that I felt is important to put. Everything you're seeing here is candid, and I think everyone's voice has to be here as candidly as it needs to be. And that is something that emerged pretty significantly. And I'm sure you can understand how that deeply connects to recruitment and retention. And then our students talked about food and actually clean water fountains and bathrooms. Forgive me that we're missing a word from that slide. Now, if we go to the culture of responsiveness with our community, they want their engagement in consistent and clear and timely ways, include varied perspectives, organized by elementary, middle, and high, any type of communication or engagement, which I've shared with you, and vary the communication, emails, town halls, websites, etc. There was a stress on parent-teacher communication, especially when students are struggling, descriptive feedback about students' progress, garner feedback directly through schools, and curriculum updates. Our staff talked about trust teachers, trust their input, and they also talked about parent partnership for realistic course selection and parent education around alternative pathways. And again, you're seeing that theme that is really giving us a sense of how we need to bring different perspectives together. Academic excellence remains the priority. Multiple pathways are honored, and district working with parents and students helps students make decisions that align with their passions and strengths so that kids are in the place where they can be the most successful. Our staff would say that in some cases we have some disconnects there that we need to address. Our students talked about teachers who listen and want to hear what students have to say. And for teachers to reiterate material, slow down, review answers, improve understanding. So basically what I've been able to provide for you is taking 200 thoughts from each of the 3 surveys, and through the process of analyzing all of the information, this is what has emerged. Now, the next slide speaks to something that Thought Exchange allows that probably, since it's not forward facing, our community doesn't realize it, but it's one of the strengths. That is, when there may be polarized concepts, we get a deeper picture of where those ideas align. And I'll show you an example of it in a minute. So in other words, if one group of parents rates a certain theme of thoughts as a 5, and another group of parents rates those same thoughts as a 1, we'll actually in the next 2 slides get to see what that looks like. And the reason I chose to put that in is not in any way to cause division in our community, but to help our community understand when we're leading, this is part of the challenge we're leading in, that we are not a homogeneous community where everybody agrees with the same thing and we just have to do A and B and we're all going to live fine. It doesn't work like that. And these two next slides are going to share this with you. Having said that, our staff were pretty aligned, so there were no different slides. Our students were pretty aligned. There are no different slides. But our parent caregivers were not as aligned in a couple of key areas. Now, I would suggest you turn to page 17 if the screen is a little too small. What you're seeing there under equity and support, you see the comments of 500, give or take, people and the comments of 300 people. Now, they're clearly of the people who participated, there's a majority, and there's other voices to consider. Down the left side, you see what the 499 have suggested. Remove the equity liaisons, the board's not listening, focus on academics and get rid of the woke stuff. On the other side, you hear, thank you for hiring the liaisons. You're doing a great job and we appreciate where you're going. You can't get any more disparate than that. The good news though, is in the middle, there isn't complete polarization because those same, give or take 800 people actually found common ground in what you see in the middle. They're worried about our kids who aren't doing emotionally well. Smaller classes, of course, security in bathrooms, more electives, like such as business. Challenge students in engaging ways, give teachers more time to update parents, extracurriculars that don't require mastery, educate on different options after high school, clear, meaningful communication. So even though we have a discrepancy there, we also have some commonality. And I think that's important for us, and you'll see in the analysis how I've wrestled with that. If you look at the next slide, engagement. 360 people talked about concerns raised by parents should be considered and implemented, need details and data that measure outcomes, teachers accountable for more timely responses, using the same communication platform, should not have to hire tutors, parent surveys, not thought exchanges, share feedback that is collected. Then on the flip side, these are the people who responded completely different to the same comments, bring class back to SRV, comments have become rude, angry, ill-informed, district shares information and parents aren't paying attention, then blame district, let teachers teach, parents support from home, but don't interfere, like when schools highlighted for the, we like when schools are highlighted for the amazing work they do, and do more virtual small group meetings with parents. So once again, so you understand the diagram, these are people that would have responded the exact opposite to the same points. But once again, if you look at where they agree, there is agreement in the middle, so that it gives us some important starting points, such as building transparency and trust, again, smaller class sizes, the students' emotions, families need open communication with their schools. Like, there are things in that middle section that, again, we can place some of our energy and attention on. So I'm almost finished, so we'll have a lot of chance for discussion. I just think it's best if I kind of go through everything and then we can stop and engage in dialogue. So what we learned through this process affirms the work that already exists. So for example, we saw lots of examples that our community wants our kids to be engaged in real world learning, critical thinking, more engaged work and instruction. And we will do a better job of making deep learning a less complicated concept to understand. Obviously, it's not fully understood yet, and we certainly take responsibility for that. The way I describe it, yes, our kids need everything in terms of reading. They gotta read, they gotta write, they gotta be able to do math, they've got to understand science, scientific concepts, and they need to think and create and problem solve. And subjects, as we get older, is not how the world works. Even though they need deep concepts, the world doesn't work in silos. And so anytime we can get kids thinking across disciplines, that's yet again another important aspect of deep learning. But clearly there was enough that emerged that this is important. Grading and assessment, that process that we are piloting at the moment and no policies or decisions have been made, clearly emerged, most importantly from the students. And I really want to underline that that was their number one comment. Please give us more opportunities to show our learning. That doesn't diminish academic standards or rigor for kids to have opportunities to show their learning. And that, I think, is a really important affirmation of that work. And of course, recruiting and retaining effective staff who represent our community. Broadening the definition of success, more pathways, different courses, arts, celebrating all learners, and maintain high standards. That came up all the way through this. Social emotional well-being and equity. Additional counselors, student voice, strong relationships, students feel safe, respected, and included. That definition of equity is completely agreed to based upon this data. Other definitions that we've heard about that I'll speak about in a minute aren't agreed to, but this at least is a foundational starting point for us. Now, issues that are challenging to resolve. You know me well enough to know that I am very candid about that, which is harder for us to simply do. When we talk about smaller class sizes, we need ongoing budget for smaller class sizes. We cannot use one-time funding for smaller class sizes. For people who don't appreciate the fact that we have equity or MTSS liaisons, those are paid for out of one-time money. Even if you stop them at the end of this year, because we're contractually obligated till then, those aren't necessarily going to make us have smaller class sizes. And this is a big issue in our community. And I would suggest that as base funding potentially at some point comes in, this might be the next thing to consider. The reason why cost of living allowances historically in school districts is not used for class size is because that's supposed to be used for the additional costs that emerge through inflation and such. That's the reason why those dollars that we've been receiving don't tend to be attached to class size. But I would suggest, based upon what we've learned through this process, that when there are base dollars, because right now the base dollars that we received helped us eradicate any structural deficit. It's gone. And if we were to gain other base dollars down the road, then this could be considered. Combined classes are connected to the same issue. Kids don't come to our schools in groups of 20, 28, 32. And we could not afford if there were no combined classes, because what it would mean is, as soon as you had one student over whatever might be allowed, you'd have to actually open up a class and hire a teacher. That is not going to work. So we're going to still have to lean in, because clearly there's an issue around that, figure out how to support our staff, ensure that we are doing the very best we can. But I'm just being totally frank to say, no combined classes is not something this district can afford. Now, I know the kids told us they want the food trucks outside. They just want the taco truck. And I'm not being facetious when I say it's not allowed. The state won't allow it. So you'll hear in a minute what Zeta Riker is going to try to do to continue to engage students, because what they asked us for can't be done in the state of California because it doesn't follow the guidelines. We still want to serve the kids better. It can't be a food truck. And the reason why communicating differently for elementary, middle, or high struck us as challenging, even though it's a major thought, is so many of our families have kids in all three schools. I don't think they're going to want to respond to us 3 times. So we're going to take that back to figure out with you if we can think of something. But the last thing we want to do is give families more work to do because they have to do something 3 times. I don't know if they'd appreciate that, just so that we could get the information distinctly. Now, we can give them more opportunities to say, I have an elementary student and a high school student, or I just have a middle school. We could probably build in some of that, but to completely do it separately, I'd need to engage parents a little bit more to figure out how we operationalize that without adding more stress to people's plates. So that's kind of the issues to challenge. The issues I would suggest this data has taught us we need to work on. The trust piece. And I've always said that trust is a relationship. It takes all of us to be a part of it. When trust is broken, for whatever reason, it's really challenging to rebuild. The only way I know to do it is through healthy, honest conversations. The conversations have to be at least coming from the same starting point, like we all agree with the foundational facts, so we actually have something to talk about. And I'm hoping we're getting there. I'll have some suggestions in a minute about what we might consider to continue to grow that, but I would suggest that is really something that did emerge from this work. Engaging our parents and caregivers in our strategic work came up over and over again. Does our community understand it? Do you agree with it? If you don't agree with it, fine, but at least are we talking apples and apples? We did move in this direction after engaging thousands of people through a strategic process. It wasn't something we did up here. And now that we're living it, if we need further insights and perspectives, that is important. So we are thinking about what the next, like almost year would look like in terms of parent engagement work. It's not, none of us at the district level's sole job is to focus on parent engagement. And frankly, it is all of our jobs. And we're realizing that we got to be a bit more intentional about how to do that. All the steering committees are talking about this right now, as you know, because you serve on them. How do we engage and help our parents understand? The staff feeling unsupported or overwhelmed is something we just have to lean into. What's in our control, what's not in our control. I speak with our union leaders monthly, and this is a #1 concern for them. We need to create opportunities for our equity work and our equity liaisons to be understood so that if people don't want them, they can let you know based upon what they are and what they're not. So I've already shared with you that unfortunately, MTSS liaisons and our equity liaisons are instructional coaches. We've always had them in San Ramon. There were equity TSAs before. So this is not a new concept. You as a board, way before I got here, have always had teacher leaders whose job it was to help their colleagues with their instructional practice for whatever you were working on at the time. Before I was here, it was. So I need our community to understand that teacher leaders, instructional coaches, liaisons, call them what you want, have been in San Ramon Valley for a long time. And they just change based upon our need. So that's important for, I think, people to understand as well. But third, this is what they're supposed to do. Kids need effective instruction. They need precise interventions when they haven't been able to learn it, and they need to be safe and included in school. That's what the liaisons are doing. They're not equity police. They're not looking out over people's shoulders. They're changing and supporting instruction. And they're supporting their staffs in the kind of discussions required to actually do this work in an effective way. Now, we don't have that much one-time money left. We are still thankfully going to have some one-time money into the future. When we bring the budget forward, we will ask you for a certain number of liaisons, and we will be clear about what they're doing. They won't be the same number as we have this year because we know the budget won't be there. But it's the #1 researched, evidence-based tool for how you change teacher practice. Teachers helping teachers. So I would argue that if we did away with liaisons of all sorts, we would actually be causing a problem. It's your decision though. but I'm just letting you know that one, it's clear that people in our community don't understand what they are, what they do, and how we've always had them, just in different iterations. Two, one-time funds versus ongoing funds, but it is always your decision regarding how that model is going to look as we go forward. But I am saying that I would hope that you would be able, and we would be able to show you the data about the impact that they're having so that we can have some liaisons supporting our teachers in our schools. We need to work on the clean and safe bathrooms piece just because we must. We need to work on lunch. I don't know what we're going to do, but we're going to work on lunch. I say that with, we have some ideas, I'm just teasing. And we need to look at the mental health pressures, the mental health issues, the behaviors, the bullying, the accountability, the restorative. It's prevalent. The issues are there. And we got to partner with our families. We got to support our staff because the needs are greater than we've ever seen. And I can say that having decades of experience. And the notion that students need tutoring, especially in math. We got to deal with that. So I'm almost finished. So next steps. This is just my proposals for next steps. Again, if anything that we're talking about doesn't align with what you want to do, based upon ensuring that whatever we talk about makes its way into our strategic directions in some way, I'm assuming that everything that you're seeing here is actually already in the strategic directions. It's just kind of going further. So I don't need an action on this that I'm proposing unless you actually want to do something different. And if you want to do something different, then we have to agendize it at a board meeting. So next steps is obviously this feedback is rich and it is very informative and it is informing us. As I've already shared, a parent engagement strategy is the next piece. It's got to be clear. It's got to be formalized. It's got to be intentional. It's got to be different town halls, in person, virtual. We need you as a part of it, for you to have dialogues with people in small groups, because individually you are very able and capable of doing that. And we just got to take what already exists in terms of our community engagement strategy, tighten it up specifically to what we learned, and frankly, be a little bit more focused. So instead of me just doing my dialogues every month, I'm going to do a dialogue on assessment. I'm going to do a dialogue on equity liaison. Like, we're going to figure that out. And we want your insights and thoughts on that as well. We are finalizing a student voice plan that really will take our student leadership and our student voice work and make it clearer to our community what we're doing. We really need to share examples and illustrations of what we're talking about, short videos and ideas. We've got an idea for you that I'm going to share in the new year. This is going to just become something. I'm going to go back to the 30-second videos I used to do more often that people liked because they told me they're missing them. There's all kinds of things that we can do to say, now we know where the questions are. How can we actually illustrate? Because again, I don't mind if someone disagrees with what we're doing as long as they understand what we're doing. And then we're actually saying, when you did this, I don't agree with it for these reasons. That is an amazing conversation. What's difficult is when we hear what we're doing and I can't find any examples of it. And that's where the disconnect becomes more difficult. Now, I'm not naive. I understand we all have our own perceptions and experience and filters, and we hear and see things in different ways. And I get all that. That's where we have to have spaces, not just in boardrooms, to have rich discussion so that we can come to a better understanding of what it is that people are asking for or talking about. So in terms of the math piece, we have hired a math coordinator by shifting existing resources. It's not an additional FTE. If you recall, we moved up one of our coordinators to a director, and then we moved a coordinator over to take that spot, and then it allowed us to free up a math position so that we can really take a deep dive into what are the essential standards, what do our teachers need, and how can we do in a program, like a program effectiveness kind of audit, if you will. And that really is something that I promised Debbie Pettish, because she's working on the learner profile, as you know, that's a project for next school year. But I just want you to know that the whole math piece is there and important. We are creating multiple opportunities for our staff to share their perspectives and to collaborate more, but we're going to figure out with our union colleagues if there's more we can do there. Right now, we've got curriculum meetings that are happening with just staff. We've got curriculum reps. We've got small subject areas like arts and library and all the rest, but maybe there's more we can do. So we're going to explore that. Now, you've heard me talk about a college and career readiness plan that will align with our strategic directions. That's the plan which will think about interest strengths of kids in elementary school, pre-career kind of stuff in middle school where they understand our Naviance system, which is the whole connection to the post-secondary world, but earlier, and then how we look at our secondary program much more from a pathways perspective, and then how do we ensure that there are multiple pathways. Again, I put December 2023 because I'm trying to manage the lean and mighty curriculum instruction team's time, but this will meet the needs that emerge through this data. I would say that our MTSS process, which is why I know we were selected as a lighthouse district, it is a spectacular program that focuses on students, data, screening, instruction, intervention, communication, and monitoring. And the work that's happening, and again, I'm not just saying it, I've been in a bunch of districts. The work that's happening in this space is going to help us with not just the academics, but also the social emotional well-being part, because those important people are around the table as well. We are working on how to deal with the bathroom issue. It's not fully baked here, but at least to have ways for our schools to understand when something is not right. Obviously, we want our kids to feel safe in our bathrooms. We want our kids to use them. And we also understand that we got a significant amount of feedback that this is something that needs to be developed. The reason it isn't more baked than what you see here is because we really do need to talk to principals and other staff as well. But just know that we're flagging it as something we have to pay attention to. As I said earlier, Zeta Riker, who is our child nutrition director, is doing a really significant job. And it's a thankless job sometimes because there's a lot of complaints. And I just want to call out, I'm really proud of the work that's happened. And I want her to know that. We let her know that lunch came up, and please don't take it in the wrong way. But she said, don't worry. She's already created a school meal experience task force, and that's the name. And students are very involved in that. She's launching a school meal ambassador program. Like, she's all over this engagement piece. And if you've seen Zeta, you probably haven't, but when you see Zeta with kids, she hears, she understands. We have hired a chef. That's all because it took us a while to find one. So there is a whole plan in place to make it better. It's just going to take a little bit of time to get there. So that's a lot. My closing remark is that we are committed to listening. We are grateful for these reflections. They have given us a ton of information, and all of the information is going to be, as I said, on the web, on our website, so that if anybody wants to look at all kinds of stuff, they can. Like, there's nothing that you can't see. And I hope that the way in which my team and I took the insights and looked at our strategic directions and organized it by where did we get affirmation, where do we have a problem that's hard to solve, and where do we need to lean in for the next iteration. I hope that that way of organizing resonates with you. If not, we can certainly answer any questions. And my last comment, for those who feel that a survey is easier than a thought exchange, I will say why I appreciated a thought exchange. If you add up 3,000 parents and 8,000 kids and 1,000 teachers, give or take, that's a lot of pieces of paper. And the only thing you can do some Google stuff, but for the most part, you got to just go and theme it and tag it and figure it all out. This is a platform that actually took literally thousands of thoughts and gave it back to us in a real candid way. And I'm hoping for those in our community who are listening or who will watch this later, every piece of raw data you got right back tonight. So there's nothing more there, but at least we were able to get it to you. We closed the last thought exchange 3 weeks ago. If we had this much data, we'd be giving this back to you next March with someone having to sit at a desk, hiding, outlining, and trying to figure out how to classify and organize. Now, special thanks to Kit Bragg, who's in the back, Kathy McSweeney, who's behind. They did a spectacular job of most of the heavy lifting here. And I'm grateful to you for it, with help from Ed Services, with help from all of our cabinet team. And I wanted to be the presenter because it was important for me after they did the first huge piece of work that I sit with it myself, synthesize in my own mind what it's saying so that I could share it to you in a way that hopefully you then can provide your insights and perspectives in return. So I'm going to stop there. That was a lot. And by the way, we don't have to finish talking about all of this information at one time. It may mean that it propels a desire for another workshop around a specific topic within it. So over to you.
I have a question for clarity. So when under the issues that are challenging to resolve, and we talked briefly about communicate, engage differently for elementary, middle, and high school. I'm curious what that actually means. Does that mean just in terms of whether using Schoology or, the platforms? Does that mean, I guess I just want a little more information on what you found that statement to mean based on all of the information.
One of the things that Thought Exchange does is it gives us a concept. And in this particular case, that concept was highly ranked. It doesn't always give us the specifics that you're talking about, which means that whether we choose a focus group, whether we choose to work with, we have to find out more about what it means, because at this point, we wouldn't have any more information regarding that concept than you would have.
Okay, because my mind goes to a couple different places. So it goes to, the idea of how are teachers communicating with parents. It goes to how much control a parent has at an elementary school level relative to a high school level in terms of what's happening in the classroom, right? To me, those are kind of two different thoughts, and I'm not sure if that's collected in this one statement or
not. That particular statement as a statement rose to the top. So it means that however the people who participated interpreted that statement, they liked it. What we have to
you have to go back and explain how Thought Exchange works in terms of how you participate. It asks I think we need to pick this apart because it's been a while. It asks a very open-ended question, and people respond with all these different responses. And that was a response, and that was a highly ranked response. But there was the put the first part in, and then it was take another whatever number of characters it was to explain what you mean or say how. It looks like that one doesn't have any how with it. Right. But I mean, I think that's what's so unique about Thought Exchange compared to a survey, where whoever creates the survey creates the questions, and you get these, generic agree, disagree, whatever. And then everybody tells you, I don't like how you designed your survey. I didn't get to say anything, and they want the comment part. So this kind of starts with the open comment.
Now, Kathy, you said, is there something that you can add to it based upon what you read?
Yes, there is a second part to that comment, and they say it's clear by the comments that elementary students and high school students.
It sounds like it aligns, Laura, with what you're saying. But the way Thought Exchange works as well is where we find something that has a profound impact on our community, we just have to figure out a way to learn more about it. So that's what we'll do with what does that mean? When there's a kind of polarized view in our community, so let me go right to the one that was the highest for the parents. Yes, you can remove equity liaisons at the end of this year. It's a budget issue. You can't end them now because that, as I said, is a contractual obligation. And if you were to make a decision that we didn't need liaisons, or you wanted me as the superintendent to bring forward kind of what the plan is for them and what their requirements would be, that's something that we would do during budget season. But what clearly emerged for us when you saw 500 and 300 is, we got a disagreement here. So let's be sure we're all talking apples and apples first. And if we're talking apples and apples, fair enough, then we've got to figure out what we're going to do about the discrepancies, and then we can move forward in a healthy way. Right now, when I engage our community around what we're trying to do and what we're not trying to do a better job of helping people understand what we're doing. Because a lot of what I hear, I don't know where that exists. Like, I'll give you an example. If anybody is making a young person feel like they are an oppressor, that's not acceptable. Not acceptable. I hear this all the time. Tell me where this is so we can talk about it. It's not acceptable. So that's an example where we just have to lean in and figure it. And if it's happening, I'm not saying it isn't happening because I can't be in 35 sites. None of my team can. We have to deal with it and we have to engage. We have to have a conversation about it. But sometimes we are doing something that people don't like. I mean, I'm in this space. Like when we do a read aloud that is representative of all kinds of different families and it's fourth grade. We're doing that because that connects to the safe, included, respectful. That people they know the truth and they don't want us doing that. I hear you. There's some laws around that and then you give us direction around that. I would hope we can get to a place where we're having conversations candidly, even if they're tough. But in order to do that, we got to figure out how to build the trust because you don't have any of those conversations without the trust. See, that's the problem. Without the trust, you don't get anywhere. So that's why I put that at the top of the list. I don't know exactly what to do with that. I'm open to hearing what you think about that, but the building of the trust piece has got to become like the number one so we can have some of the other tough discussions from my perspective. I agree with that. Trust is a big word.
In reference to the equity liaisons and what they're doing and the miscommunication or misinformation that's out there, one of the most powerful things for me, aside from the fact that I'm privy to visiting individual school sites and actually talking to the teachers who are the liaisons and talking to the liaisons themselves, when you do that and you see the students, there's no question about the incredible impact they're having. But one of the other things that Laura and I were able to participate in is the LCAP committee. And as part of that committee, there was a presentation from the equity liaisons and the MTSS and how they work together. And that was so amazing and really defined definitively the impact of the work and how they're working with the teachers and the coaching that's going on and how receptive a lot of the teachers are and the impact it's having on our students. So if we could have some way for them to, whether it's a video or a presentation, a night, whatever, something that we can put out to the public, that little capsule of information for me, if there was any doubt in my mind, it was completely removed when I heard from them and saw the incredible amount of professionalism, enthusiasm, and impact that these professionals are having on our kids. The public needs to see that.
And maybe to address the multiple modes of accessing stuff like that, we do it as a live event that people can come to, and then we record it. So if you can't make it, you've got access. But I think that way we're being very deliberate about bringing it to people.
Well, and
And that's part of the awareness strategy we're creating. So these ideas are helping. Go
yeah,
ahead.
and it has to be digestible too. I think that, you know, that our video is not really digestible. So when you talk about your 3-minute videos, maybe one
30
of,
second.
or 30-second videos, even better, much better, is one of those opportunities to kind of just hit the high notes of an equity liaison, of an MTSS liaison. And I think, you know, one of the notes that I made with that topic was a question of how do they support the classroom? You know, the one of the things that rose to the top, and maybe that was the top, was we want more teachers in the classroom. We want smaller class size. Agreed. I mean, we all agree with that. And equity liaison, MTSS liaisons, equity liaisons. They're not teachers with a classroom, but how do they impact that classroom, you know, and in the presentation that we saw, they talked about that, about how it allows for opportunities for teachers to create small groups. They set up frameworks for them. They actually pull out individual students so that the teacher can work with, you know, it's those types of things that I think having that information.
And I think all of that is really rich and deep. And while I agree we need 30-second teasers, but we need also the longer things so that we go deeper, so we can show that example of a coach pushing in.
Well, especially since you're right. I mean, we've had TFAs and, you know, different types of liaisons, or just
Whatever you wanna
different
call them.
names, yeah,
Right.
throughout the
TSAs,
years.
TOSAs.
But yeah, but like new families or family who didn't catch from TSAs to, you know, liaisons, or, you know, they might not know exactly.
That's important. Language is
And then
important.
you have a library of stuff that if you join this conversation 6 months into it, you can go back and get the beginning part. Because I think as some of this stuff evolves, I think a lot of folks weren't involved when we were building strategic approaches. Others were. And we know others were, but we got to keep like bringing everybody else along.
And that library gives the school site administrators, the teachers, PTA, Ed Fund, it gives them the tools to be able to educate and build.
And that presentation wasn't terribly long. I mean, it could be encapsulized pretty easily into maybe a 15 or 20-minute presentation and really hit all the high points. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll say that, so my daughter was in the LCAT for the first time, and on the drive home, the first thing she said was, I wish we had MTSS liaisons when I was in elementary school, and then went into how that would have affected her. And it was very insightful, and for me, it was just, you know, I mean, it was one of those things that was like, yeah, it really hit home for me, that the difference that it would have made.
And we have to be careful about acronyms.
Oh, yes.
Multi-tiered
Oh, yes.
systems of support.
I know some of the acronyms. So can I make a observational comment about the equity liaisons and where I think some of the angst comes from the community too? And this is, I have the benefit of being an outsider, at least for, you know, recently and in the near future, is I think when we kind of talk about this big concept of how do we build the trust back between all these stakeholder groups and get it back together. And I think back to the board meeting where equity liaisons came in and the genesis of it. And also what it was juxtaposed against was the Cal High incident. And I think one thing that's going to have to happen in the community too, it became, you know, equity liaisons became out, oh my gosh, like this happened in reaction, moving against a certain group of people. They felt that way, whether that's true or not, that was some perception from people. So I think there's some healing that might need to be done on that too, of it seemed like this event happened. There was a lot of confusion around it. I think there was multiple different communication things that felt flat and people were missed. And it seemed like in that meeting where parents wanted to voice their concern, we said, equity liaisons is what you're going to get. And that was a reaction I think multiple parents felt. And so in communicating with a lot of the community, at least in my area, where we campaigned, we knocked on over 3,500 doors, did a lot of farmers markets. I heard that repeatedly come up. So I think it's one thing that we might almost need to come back to a baseline and go, okay, here's why and I think it kind of ties in with what we were talking about, right? Like, what was it for? Why were we trying to do it? What do they do on a day-to-day basis? Because in a lack of, I think, clarity, you're going to insert your own, you're going to assume the worst, right? They're there like looking over microaggressions and pushing things here and here. And maybe that's what they're doing. Maybe it's not, but you talked about coming back to an apples and apples thing. I think that if I looked at the genesis of when we look at this big divide, right? We've got this 499, remove equity liaisons, 305, thank you for hiring equity liaisons. And is there a middle point in there where we can go, what are equity liaisons doing that we can all agree on? And maybe we get there.
And I think that's what I'm driving at when I'm saying probably the biggest mistake was to call them equity liaisons. because we know what we want our liaisons to do. And instruction and safe learning environments aren't separate. Now, we do hear, and not oftentimes in boardrooms, but you'll have other opportunities as board members and you have in the past, where kids who don't feel comfortable coming to public spaces will tell us how they feel. And that's the reason why when we need to do some heavy lifting for a short period of time, I've defined what I wanted, and Hong is here who leads this. I defined what my hopeful outcome would be for this year. That as a community of staff, we'd understand the difference between our intent and our impact. And if somebody is impacted in a harmful way, we figure out how to deal with that. If the only thing we do through this year with the work of the equity liaisons is help us with intent and impact, I can honestly tell you that that would take away a good 70% of what crosses our desks that hurts people. There's another 30% of things that happen that unfortunately a lot more egregious and a lot more serious, and we need to take on all kinds of other different strategies. But a lot of times when you pull kids together, or when frankly you pull adults together, and somebody says, when you spoke like that, it hurt me for these reasons. Or when you did that, this is how I felt. If the party who caused that can actually hear that and adjust their behavior in a certain way, we've actually strengthened our community. That's what we're talking about when we speak about intent and impact. That's what the equity liaisons are trying to lean into. Unfortunately, when you take that concept of intent and impact and add emotion to it, and history to it, and culture to it, and politics to it, it becomes one of the most challenging discussions to have. And frankly, it blew up in this room.
Yeah, and I think, and I want to say thank you, because I think that bringing that perspective into this room, I think is really valuable. I feel like in that moment, and it's, you know, it's hard for me to even go back there because I know it kind of brings up a lot of triggering for a lot of people, and it was hard for everyone across the board. My kids are at Cal, I think that for some, and you brought those voices in, it felt reactive. And for me sitting on the dais, it felt like it was the straw that broke the camel's back. And so it wasn't just that wasn't the reason, but that was that when the reaction to that incident and everything that happened around it became, I don't want to use the word toxic because that's not right, but it became more, and that's not even right either, but you know, it got messy, I guess. It got really messy and really emotional, and there was so much passion in all of us, and it's our kids, you know, and so it felt, I think, for some that it was reactionary, and for me at least, it was just time. I also think that the word equity has a lot of weight to it and is a bigger word than the heart of it. You know what I mean? It has a lot attached to it. And so that's part of it too. So I think that, you know, building that understanding of what that is, and yeah, we could have chosen not to use that word, but at the same time, it's like, we got to call it what it is, you know, and we can't be afraid of using the words just because there's other meanings attached to it and it may be, you know, misinterpreted in some other way. We still have to kind of have that guiding light and you know, call it what it is, right? So anyway, so I guess the point I'm making is that I think that there's a lot of understanding that needs to happen, and to get away from the trigger, you know, the triggering, and talk more about the work and how, what we need and where the students are in that work, and you know, that center point of
That's where the trust comes though.
right.
Because, you know, in my world, and we haven't figured this out yet, MTSS liaison isn't understood either. So if I said we have 25 instructional coaches, and 5 instructional coaches are going to do these 3 things, I've already said: effective instruction, great intervention, positive and inclusive learning environment. most people would say, okay, I get it. And when we say an instructional coach helps teachers do better, that usually works for people. So whether we talk about equity liaisons that have this emotion, or whether you talk about MTSS liaisons that people don't understand what that acronym means, bottom line is this is what we're trying to do. Because for any of our liaisons who might be watching, who are worried about this conversation, we value them. They make an impact. We will afford, I hope, with your permission, as many as we can, based upon one-time funding for this work. But to your point, and I'm grateful for it, when there's already a belief that has emerged that something is a certain way, and we got to figure out a way to, like, I hear you, I understand, but can we clean the slate a little bit so we can start again and have enough trust to start again? Like, I hear you, but there might be more to this. Can we have a conversation about it? And I don't mean to sound Pollyanna when I say we just gotta have more conversations.
Yeah.
And disrupt the narrative.
Yeah, and I think we can, and please hear me, I know I'm new here to this seat. The intention is not to pick at an old wound at all. It's to kind of maybe go back and try to find, hey, what were some root causes of, I think, more visceral reactions than were needed. And how do we restore that trust? Just like in relationships or marriage or whatever, you kind of have to have a mea culpa moment of like, okay, I see where we went wrong. How can we together move forward? And I think having those conversations will be awesome and helpful. And I think this is part of it.
And
Yeah.
figuring out, and this is the part that you as board members will hear, and I in the superintendent's chair, for those whose voices will not become part of that conversation because they're not willing, but still need to be part of the conversation, is something we got to figure out. Because when some members of our community don't hear those voices because they're not willing to come in here or other places, they don't know they exist.
Yeah.
So part of the stress is, if I say to all of you, because you know it, and there are those who felt A, B, and C, if you don't have that experience, if you don't know people who have had that experience, you might not agree or believe. So we've got to figure that part out too. Because what worry about whenever we're dealing with tough stuff is, how do we get everybody's voice around the table? And how do we ensure that we elevate all the voices, not just those that actually are the loudest, even though everybody's perspective matters. So I hope, I trust we can get to a better place by having what you've talked about. Absolutely.
I'd love to kind of dig into trust and what that means, and you know, maybe some ideas of how we can kind of, you know, build it a little bit more. You know what I mean? I think that when I think about trust, and I know that, you know, you have a counseling background, but I think some of that has to do with control. You know, it's some of that has to do with feeling some ownership, and then obviously understanding, having comfort in it, in the truth or in the facts. You know, if you're not comfortable with that, with those facts, maybe you're not necessarily going to trust those facts. And so I think that there's, you know, there's a lot of nuance to that word trust, and we talk a lot about trust and transparency, and I mean, I campaigned on it, Shelley campaigned on it, you campaigned on it, you know, 12 years ago, you probably campaigned, you know what I mean? This is something that's always an issue. You know, let's really kind of break it down and figure out what it actually means, and then how can we work towards it, you know, build it.
And I used to always do this as a PTA president thing. It was at the high school when I was PTA president. You have to start from a place of assuming good intention. Because building trust, it's two-way, right? You have to participate. The whole transparency thing, I mean, you can't have transparency just, you know, when you're thinking about something at 11:30 at night. Where is that, right? You have to kind of commit to, I'm going to be a participant in this community. We have to make it easy. We have to make it accessible. We have to come at it from different directions. But there also needs to be a commitment that I want to learn. I want to open my mind. I want to understand your perspective. And, you know, maybe starts with us as role models. Right?
I agree with that. I think that we as a board need to be visible and more accessible in our community. Historically, because of the way, it's just a different time and things have changed about the way that we function and what's really functional and works. and connects us to our communities. You know, especially in light of the fact that we're each from an area, while we all are taking care of the whole school district and thinking about the needs of all of our students at all times. We all come from separate areas and have different constituencies. For me, being out in the community and being able to be at go to group things and participate like that, and also in our with our staff, being able to be visible to them and accessible. For me, office hours are an important piece that we have never really done as a board as a whole. And I think that while not that, as I've been doing it a little while, not that many people take advantage of it, but I think it's the appearance of being available and wanting to hear from people. So as we develop as a board, that we're a new board, we have a new member, if we can come up with some other ideas about how we make ourselves more accessible and more connected. And I know that Dr. Malloy's been giving us more opportunities to interact with the community and with our individual schools. I think all of that will help with the trust factor.
Yeah, I felt like, you know, when I think back to when we were working on the raising the base, and we had, I think it was through the PTA, we had those individual town halls and the in-person ones, maybe, you know, it wasn't as well attended as we'd hoped, but I know in my experience with that, it built trust. Yes, I was giving information, but it built the handful of people that were on that call. They saw that I knew, that I understood, that I could not only explain it, but that I could answer questions about it, and I could, you know, that kind of thing. And so I think in
And that you take questions.
and that
we're willing to.
oh
do
right,
that,
yeah, yeah,
No, I mean, that sounds
Yeah.
tiny. It sounds obvious.
right,
But you know how there was so much time in Zoom world where here's the presentation, bye, we're done. Whereas on those, we deliberately built Q&A time.
yeah. And I think it's like show, you know, that some of that trust, you know, again, back to that word trust, is about expertise, right? It's like trusting that the person that's giving you the information knows the information, has a handle on it, you know, understands it, and is making decisions based on that expertise, right? And so, you know, that's again part of that definition of what it means to build trust, right?
And I think when I talk about strengthening our already existing community parent engagement plan, it means taking this data, talking with our cabinet team as well, connecting with you, and frankly, sharing the load. Who's going to go where to do what? Virtually, in person, and just have, I mean, again, I don't mean to sound too simplistic, have more conversations.
And I almost wonder too, in different venues, and I think this is the hard part, is, you know, where do you engage with the busy parent who's out of town most weekends, who's got sports going on, who, like, these are some of the parents that we're probably missing, right? And we do a lot of community engagement involvement. I'm thinking just to what we talked about the other night with all our committees we're going to be on. So this is great. We're really engaging with the community, but I also think that people who would engage with those committees are also a similar subsection of the community, and you're still going to miss. It's almost as simple as, you know, I think this is like campaigning thing, but like when you go and talk with people at farmers market on the side of a sidewalk, you hear a lot of different things that you're probably going to hear at those meetings. I'm not advocating for us to go to every farmers market. I've done with those for a little while myself, but what are some of those types of places where we can, I don't know. I don't have an answer. I'm just throwing it out.
Yeah. Well, it's, you know, it aligns with the making sure that we're hearing the voices that maybe aren't, you know, it may be that they're not in the room because they're not safe, but it also may be that they're not in the room because they don't have, it's a burden, or they don't have the bandwidth or whatever, right? So it's going to those. Yes, there are people that will come to us to gather information, and then there are people that we need to go to them to gather information and speak to them in the way that they want to hear, right? And so it's that, you know, how is it digestible to one person versus another person, right? Some people will want, and it's good to have that hour deep dive, and then other people they just want the executive summary, man. They just want to know that they just want the mission,
Provide
you know.
notes.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to just emphasize that school is about a local community. And district is about setting direction and aligning resources and monitoring improvement, but the relationships really live at school. Yeah. And that's where I think sometimes there's a bit of a disconnect because, you know, if your students, your children are okay at school, then that's what matters. And helping our principals and PTA leaders and ed fund leaders and other parent volunteers to create that synergy at school is really, and then us participating as appropriate is probably that notion of going to where the action is. Because you're right, these spaces only attract certain numbers of people and only if they're usually upset about something. Truthfully. But real relationship happens at school. So that's another thing for us to consider.
Yeah, that's great. And I think something too that Laura and Rachel, you guys were both saying is like trust and like I love how you just broke it down to like this is kind of like one of the most basic things that encapsulates a lot of these things and how what is trust, how is it defined, how does it work in real life. You see this with the teacher thing too, right? There's the teacher saying trust us, we have a lot to provide, and then you see the parents saying trust us, we know what's best for our kids. And yet there's something in the middle there too where they're both having interest in our kids. And so that's what I love about this breakdown that this thought exchange does do is we do see where we're divided, right? We see some of these polar opposites, but I love this middle. And I think, you know, from the, you know, you've got the counseling background, you know, when you're trying to bring trust back together in a family or in a relationship, sometimes you got to focus on where do we see common ground to build some momentum back. And that's what I do love about this is there is middle ground that I think we've got pay dirt here that we focus on, which is a really exciting thing.
Any other thoughts, reflections, comments?
I had one unrelated to equity, but I was looking at some of the student comments and some of the things that they want us to do, we can't do. So we want to be able to do what we can, right? And it came up about homework on vacations and things like that. And I participated in writing the new homework policy. And I believe that policy is still in effect. And there are some provisions in that for things like vacations and certain periods of time.
The challenge, though, is it doesn't apply to the AP courses. So
Right.
we've got probably a significant number of kids.
That may be, but I'm
the AP, so.
right. But I'm sure that there's a lot that are in regular classes also that may have participated in this that are thinking about that. So I don't know if
We can revisit.
Kind of an audit on
I mean,
the homework policy.
it's been it's been a long time.
we can revisit. I mean, one of the things we've talked about is we've got to follow our policies. We've got to know that they exist. And when they're not followed, we've got to intervene. So I just made a note that we'll kind of look into that.
I commiserate with them a bit on the comment they made about if you get one bad grade, you start going down the rabbit hole. My kids went down that rabbit hole many times. So, you know, I think the work that we're doing maybe in the way that we're looking at grading and things like that.
Absolutely is. I mean, that's kind of a fundamental premise of it, which again is interesting that there are folks asserting that we're doing bad things to kids with our grade reform work. And it's really about you're getting judged on, did you learn the material by end of course, not did you hit every milestone
Right.
on the way.
Yeah, it's almost like it's like restorative grading. You know, in the same way that there's restorative justice, right? It allows for people, kids to make mistakes, learn and achieve, you know, and that's just humanity. So, you know.
And again, using the grade reform conversation, we've got to do an effective job of helping people understand what it is. And then there's an ask of our community. If you don't understand what we're saying, you also have to ask. Like, I mean, we're going to do our best, but it's a relationship, it's a conversation. what I think sometimes happens is there's a belief about what we're doing. We try to intercept and say, no, it's this, not that. But without the trust piece, again, it continues to be shared as truth when it's not what is happening. And that's the piece where all that cabinet discussed this last week was, all right, we just have to be really clear. We need illustrations that people can understand. And this isn't because people aren't smart. It's just, this is our world. This is our profession. This is what we're trained to do. And like anybody who's been trained in a profession, we have a language and we have an experience. And if we're not careful, we don't make any sense.
And we also have to talk about through demonstrations and examples, what it isn't.
Yes.
Because even in our forum meeting that lasted all day last week, even amongst the people in the room, well, what about this? And if you're assessing to essential standards, what's happening to all the other standards? That everybody wasn't even on the same page about that. So, and then we need to understand it's evolving, but I love what you just said about if something doesn't make sense, ask a question.
We just have to talk about it.
Right. Well, and I mean, we're an educational community and this is about educating the community, right? And so, so really kind of taking that to heart and really thinking if we're, with any step, whether it's new or whether it's moving forward with something, there's an educational component that has to be at the foundation of it. And I mean, obviously it has to involve education, but in terms of how we're communicating it, we have to communicate it in a learning way, right?
And just to share with you as our board, we as a staff do learn from the feedback that we receive. So for example, instead of using words that can confuse people, I'm thinking you're hearing us talk a lot more in examples. Like that is a intentional strategy. So, like I said, when we talk about kids being safe, accepted, and included, and the examples we have when they're not, telling that story without ever sharing personal information, I haven't met a member of this community who has shaken their head no. But use a word like microaggression and the conversation's over. For some.
Right. Well, and
Now,
yeah,
to be fair, there are others in our community who have said to me and us, when you don't speak that candidly, you're letting us down. That is part of the dynamic. But again, what I share back is we serve our kids better when the majority of our community is around the same table. As long as we can do that without causing harm, we will do it. If it's causing harm, we will address the harm. See, and I hope that's clear. Like, I mean, it's a complex statement, which I've just made, because we can't run away from anyone's experience who feels unsafe or unsupported in our schools. How we go about addressing that is exceptionally complex, which is why we need a space for deeper understanding so that people can ask their question before making this judgment or a statement. And then we get into that terrible spin of not being able to hear each other. So that's our goal, is to figure out, we love our ideas, an engagement strategy that gets into that. Like that's, and we need to get some of our parent leaders to help us and some of our student leaders and staff leaders to help us. This probably is the big, one last comment. I didn't see a huge change to our strategic directions from this thought exchange. How we go about the next step of work. We got some pretty significant challenges to meet. That's how I took it. But again, maybe you took it differently, or you have different or other ideas.
I think that's a good way to say it. And I would just add on to this, that focusing on how we communicate. I think it's always about the communication.
communicate and educate. I mean, I think we need to add in that word, because it's one thing to tell someone, it's another thing to teach someone what we're doing, why we're doing it, what it means, how it impacts the students, and again, back to that, we all want the same thing. It's just getting there, the take, this is the direction that we feel is important, and this is why, and then maybe that can build a little bit of that control and understanding, and therefore buy-in and trust, right?
And space for when people don't agree. Like you
Right,
said,
well,
you're-
right,
Yeah, like when you said you're at the grading reform committee, it's okay while we're working through this if people don't agree, but if we can do that in a respectful way, we can learn.
And sometimes it's not even agreeing about the big thing. It's about just on the same page, in the same place with their understanding. I mean, we kind of recognize a lot of this as a journey, and some people are deeper into the learning and understand that nuance, and someone else hadn't even thought about it yet, right? And
So I want to make a comment about the CTE because the pathways, because it's come through obviously in this from staff and from parents, students, that they want more pathways, have more choices for our students who don't choose a four-year college. Yet the flip side of that I think we struggle with, or that I'm looking at, is that our culture here is so geared towards four-year college, which is great, but not all students fit that mold. So we have a big job to do, I think, in educating our community about the opportunities, the availability, and developing our pathways as much as we can so that we can have that offering of something for everybody if that's possible. So there's a lot of work, I think, that we could do there to re-educate and to give more information and look at what resources that we're putting towards those pathways. Because I know it's always a struggle with the budgeting, and CTE monies that we get aren't enough to cover what we really probably want to do and things like that. But that came through on here again, and it's something that I'm personally passionate about. And I hope that we can continue to develop it, because obviously they want it.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. I just want to make sure that, yes, definitely more pathways, but we want to make sure that we're not, doing something that's not going to change what all the issues that Shelley just described. Because sure, pathways, but I see pathways as like, hopefully it would be a little more flexible, open. It's really exploratory, right, for our students. I mean, we're talking about middle high school student, and they should still be able to explore. So instead of like, oh, I get into a biomedical pathway and I took a couple of classes, and you know what, I kind of want to take a look at the computer or the engineering or mechanical, with the auto shop. It's not auto tech or something, but now I feel like I'm committed to this pathway and I can't get off, or else I'm gonna, jeopardize my chances or something, for college. So I want to make sure, just because we're adding pathway, or same thing, right? Someone going into auto tech, and decides on something else later, they can move around. So I want to make sure that the pathways are not
they're not
set
rigid.
in stone. Yeah.
Well, I
Not like
think,
Germany.
I think there's a paradigm shift you're talking about. If we think about the profile of the learner, which we are going to develop this year with community, it's a whole process. It's going to take us 6 months. Debbie's going to tell you more about that soon. It's less about a subject area and more about the knowledge, skills, and traits, if you will, our kids need to be successful. I'll share a report with you McKinsey just put out, which is really powerful. What we're learning is, instead of discrete subjects, we can do that. Like the welding program you just heard about, that we're partnering with Las Positas, it's going to be amazing. It's not going to be stuck in one school. We figured out how to do that, and we're going to continue to figure out more of that. But another way of looking at pathways is how you can take courses and the standards, pull 3 teachers together who have a cadre of 25 kids who are going to go on a really deep learning task where they're going to solve some big problems, and keeping those skills in the forefront, critical thinking, problem solving, what have you. And the whole course is taught differently. See, my worry is that the world of subjects isn't the world that's beyond school. You still need essential standards and understandings in subjects. Please don't hear otherwise. However, but if we don't keep an eye on what is it we expect our kids to experience from being in this, it's about their interests and passion. So you don't hear me use the word CTE a lot on purpose. When you use the word CTE in vocational ed in most contexts, people go to a mindset, not college, trades, etc. Trades are amazing, but there's all kinds of values that are placed on them. So I am inviting our community to talk more about career readiness.
Yeah.
Whatever it might be. And we're going to try to define that better and maybe help us shift some of the paradigms. I'm not clear yet in what I'm saying because we need a little bit more time to flesh it out. That's why I put December 2023, because I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. But this is a significant part.
Oh, sorry, but I do have a statement too, and it goes back to one of those things we were saying before, what it is and what it isn't. College path, success versus non-college path, you're not successful, or you're not successful enough to go into college. And I think that paradigm, if that is the pushback against this, I don't imagine that that's what is intended at all. And there's a lot of paths that do not involve college that can involve more money, more freedom than some college paths as well too. And I think that's, if I'm thinking about our local community, what does success look like? And being able to understand what that is, and also like inform our students of what their possibilities are, because this is their life as well too. It's not like it's their choices to make some of these sort of pathways as well too. Incorporate student understanding and voice into that, as well as parental understanding and voice.
Kind of jumping into a little bit into, since this is all related to the, I guess some of our community don't quite understand what deep learning is, right? And I think, well, you had mentioned before that, yeah, we're doing, still writing, reading, arithmetic, all, basics and deep learning. I actually think that you cannot do deep learning without the basics of reading, writing. So for us to, as a district to do deep learning, we have to, right, like instruct the reading, right, the fundamentals, because it's foundational. It's just like, I can use a calculator, but I wouldn't know what 1 + 1 is unless I learn the math first and then to the calculator.
Yeah, deep learning kind of transcends the, the foundational learning that so.
And when I'm talking to teachers who are doing an amazing job with the foundational skills, I might ask a question. So how did your kids collaborate in the context of this learning and then communicate out what they learned? That's deep learning. A lot of times it's a passive taking in. No, just give the kids a little bit of opportunity to work on a problem together after you taught something, and then to communicate out what it is that they learned. It's not some newfangled idea. It's just taking it to the next level and age appropriately, ensuring that our kids can become effective public speakers, for example. That's one of the highest skills that you see everywhere. Or they become people who can analyze a lot of complex thoughts at once. That's a really important skill. So it's just taking the learning to the next level. So when we talk like that, even the educators will say, what are we supposed to do? Oh, is that what you're talking about? So we're defining skills a little bit more explicitly, and then inviting educators to incorporate that into an already existing lesson. Doesn't mean start from scratch.
And you and I had a conversation on this as well too, just deep learning and what is it? And it can be like in the marketing world, if you have a great marketing thing, deep learning is wow, that sounds fascinating, but I don't know what it is yet. And if that word keeps getting used repeatedly, people are like, I don't understand what deep learning actually means in real life. And we had a conversation like, is deep learning, I went to Cal Poly and it was a learn by doing, was kind of the motto, right? And that's what it is. And yet learn by doing sounds much more straightforward and mundane than deep learning. And yet how do we incorporate some of those phrases into deep learning from a perspective of communication as well too? I'm not trying to step on the word deep learning. That's not my intention. but it is one of those things that it sounds amazing and fascinating. And I've also found myself going, what exactly does deep learning? So
Education runs the risk of, we've called this 1,000 things. Inquiry-based, problem-based, differentiated. We never come up with the right term. All that I care about is when kids are in school.
that it's
they're-
actually happening.
They're excited, they're engaged, they're thinking, they're creating. I hear you, because it's like we always struggle in education to find words that really resonate. And yet we call it, like we've used so many different terms to try to get at this. So my thing is, I don't even care what we call it. As long as kids, I want to see certain things. So we're spending a little bit more time on kind of what would indicators look like if deep learning was happening, so that we can describe it more than just throw out a term.
Totally.
I had a couple other notes on separate things. So with the combo classes, we had talked to, you'd mentioned in the presentation that that was one of the things that goes to the thing of, of it being a concern. And the first thought that I had was, because I've experienced with my kids, I've experienced combo classes in another district, and it was tough. And it was all about the number. It was just all about the number. And that was really frustrating to me as an elementary parent. And I'm curious if there are ways for us to kind of look at that a little bit outside the box. And so while, yes, from a budget standpoint, can't really get rid of combo classes because of, the way that you balance a budget and at a school site, but how can we make those combo classes more supported and more effective? And I know that there are, and I've experienced it with my kids, there are great combo classes. And then there are combo classes that, maybe this is a year that, you have to provide additional support outside of the classroom because it's not coalescing the way it needs to coalesce. And so what can we do around that from a, whether it's a policy or whatever it is, to be able to, when there's a combo class that and maybe we're already doing that it is and enriched in a way that supports the combination of the students.
Maybe we can start with what support do we provide
To teachers.
to accomplish?
And the deep learning, to use that word again, speaks to essential standards versus individual curriculum standards. And I'm not suggesting we ignore them. But part of where we run into difficulty is if an educator feels that, oh my gosh, I've got all of these standards, granular standards for grade 3, third grade, and all these standards for fourth grade, and I got to figure out how to do two things at once versus some of the other strategies that we are supporting. I'm not going to suggest it isn't hard, but I also know for some of our teachers, the concept of a grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, isn't a construct that actually makes sense for this reason. In any grade, you got kids who are at this stage of the continuum and kids who are at this stage of the continuum. So the whole concept of personalizing learning and bringing the standards is something we've struggled forever. I'm being very careful when I say it. It's an additional challenge. But I do know the curriculum and instruction team are very focused on how to support. And what I'll take back is, how formalized is that support when somebody is invited to take a combo class? We have some, not many, but we have some educators that actually like to take, but many that don't. So
And then the other little note that I have, was the with staff, when they talked about how feeling overwhelmed and is there anything that we can do to take a little bit of the pressure? It's like to take the pressure out a little bit, off a little bit. Thinking about that too, and how we can create space for them to be able to do what they do best, right? And so maybe talking a little bit about that, or maybe as a district, there's already, your school sites, there's already things that are happening, but
I just had a meeting with some of our union leaders today about this. I think we just have to accept the fact that post-pandemic, everybody has been impacted, and people's patience levels and tiredness and stress levels are higher. And what would relieve that for some would be different than what would relieve that for others. So I think we've got to get to the bottom of the problem so we can figure out how to support it. In other words, what are those pressures that are causing this experience and what is in our control? The same conversation we're having at this table about trust is one that emerged in a conversation I had today. If families approach educators with questions so that there could be a rich conversation, it's easier than when the educator feels that they've done something wrong. And that's unfortunately emerging more. And our parents are saying that I need more help understanding my child when my child's not doing okay. That's an ask of the educator. So there's as much frustration from some of our parents that came out. So we got to figure this out. So tonight, I'm saying that we're naming it, as I shared with our union leaders, let's figure this out together and figure out what the plan could be. Because I don't think there's something easy we can just pull out and do. I think we've got to just figure it out.
Yeah, and I would say too, maybe at some point in that conversation, I don't know where that is on the timeline, but including parents in the solution finding, because they're a key part of it too, you know, I think, and secondary students as well, you know, I mean, I think for elementary school students, it's a little different, but just, you know, kind of creating that foundation, that framework so that everyone is supporting everyone and understanding the burdens that each holds and the passions that each has and the expertise that each, you know what I mean? It's again, it's just that kind of building that trust isn't just saying, you know, you need to trust me. Yes, I want to trust you. It's like building in the meat of it, I guess.
And that's where, if the relationships are mostly at school, how do we facilitate conversations at school? And then what conversations do we facilitate at the district level? Figuring that out is important.
Yeah.
Because I sometimes think we're so far removed from classrooms in some ways that our experience here in the boardroom needs that pulse right from the classroom and from the parents whose kids are in those classes. That's got to be a part of this strategy, but like I said, I'm not going to overspeak because I don't know yet what that next step's going to look like.
Sorry, couple quick things. One thing just on we were talking about trust, and I know that when we did this thought exchange, and you probably felt that, Dr. Malloy, you probably felt this too. It's like, where's our data, right? And I think maybe one thing here, and I was trying to make sure that I, as a parent, didn't miss this as well too. But I think that maybe the parent one came out first. Is that correct? And then maybe it was followed by staff and students. So the lag maybe that parents are feeling that we're worried about that was this one ended on September 21st. And so maybe if we communicate, hey, we're getting it from these three groups and it will be presented approximately December, January.
We did do that.
Did we do that? Oh, and I missed it? Okay.
That's
I apologize.
we did that 2 months ago.
Okay, I apologize. I missed some of that too.
But I mean, that's valuable to, you know, the
Yeah.
point is that, you know, how many touch points do you need before someone actually sees it, right? It's like, you know, you can say it and you can,
We
but
did that on that one because I had heard the criticism. I can find probably 5 to 10 examples. It was constant. I brought it up in every board meeting, just because we knew it was an issue. And I was saying, we just got to get through everybody and you kind of have to do one at a time. So that when we heard and we just we put it out in news flashes and
right. And so then also then thinking about, well, if you've said it multiple times in multiple ways and still a percentage of the community hasn't soaked in for them, then is it that maybe it's information you didn't really, you know, really want to take in because you wanted the information right away. You know, I mean, I think there's dynamics in there that we need to kind of see, you know, and that it isn't, you know, we can say it and some people don't want to hear that an equity liaison actually affects the classroom, right? Because they just see the equity as something that makes them uncomfortable, or grade reform, that word reform makes them uncomfortable. And so therefore they're not going to hear that, you know, that this is what this actually means, because you know what I'm saying? And I'm not saying that.
Oh, not at all. I'm not hearing that. I'm wondering from a logistics standpoint, I'm getting into the weeds and I apologize for that. Is there any reason why we can't take that sample all at the same time of parents, students, and teachers?
the trouble is that,
Or is it a platform issue?
well, the platform is one thing,
Okay.
but there's there's a lot that go, and even as I'm thinking about all that emerged here, at the district level, we're a pretty, I know not everybody agrees, but we're a pretty lean team. And the amount of things that we're doing on a given day are pretty extensive. And when we are conducting something like an engagement, it's just easier. Kathy was the lead, so you can see it. When you're focusing on one, then you're focusing on another, and then you're, because there's all kinds of administration that goes on.
Got it.
Like when people put inappropriate words. And
I see.
so you got to be eyes on it while it's happening. And so that's why it was just easier to say, we've got a board workshop planned in December. We're going to have all three done. But I will say we were not clear enough when the parent one went out, and we cleared it up after. So I apologize for that.
Well, I apologize for missing.
You're fine. But we weren't clear at the beginning. What needed to happen is what you heard me say an hour ago. I'm asking the team by the end of January to really think about an engagement plan that brings in everything we're doing already, tightens it up, puts it in one place, puts it on the website, because I think what happens is if we only talk in bits and pieces, it's not understood.
Yeah.
So that's part of what we're trying to work on.
And then completely separate point, because I just don't want to miss it, because I did see this in two different pillars for the students, is they bring up bathrooms twice. So both in their strategic direction for social emotional learning and the stewardship of resources. Do we have any more information on? So I think the clean part is, that makes sense, is clear, and it's going to come down to janitorial and how we coordinate things like that, I would imagine. Free of unwanted behavior, was there any more depth of
A lot of
information?
vaping and smoking stuff.
Okay, and how
Because
do you
we've learned
provide
they can
sec-
deactivate the machine.
how do you
We're gonna
okay
figure that out.
and how do you provide security in the bathroom? I mean, this is such an interesting, like, tricky topic.
It is, which is why when it emerged, we really wrote as a next step, we just got to engage. Each school's different. Each school has different issues related to this. And this is something that John Capopiano, who oversees all of our secondary schools, because truthfully, this is much more of a secondary issue than it is an
Yeah.
elementary issue. We got to just figure out a path to deal with this. We don't have it figured out yet.
And it
And-
was
and Perhaps
sorry.
we might want to add the answer to Jess's question to these slides, because I think many members in the community may assume when they read that bullet point that it has to do with gender issues and sexual bad behavior.
or any sort of like, is that what?
And so I think clarifying, if we have the data,
We have data on that.
if we know that it's the vaping issue versus the other, I think it would be good to
Yeah.
differentiate.
100%.
Am I misspeaking though? I know about the vaping. Is there anything else that emerged?
No, there was no data that suggested none of the almost 10,000 thoughts we collected. None spoke to any bad behavior. In kids. That it really was more smoking.
Okay, so we can clean up that bullet before we.
Because I think it would just help with the clarity of information.
Right.
It's that lack of knowledge leads to assuming the worst. Yeah. And so when I look at that too, that it's not what I was thinking, but I was thinking, what is the range of complexity? Or are people feeling bullied in the bathroom? Are people, like, what is happening in the bathrooms?
And again, just like the question Laura raised with parents wanting us to communicate in a certain way, this could potentially become a topic that each school takes and understands their own context better.
Yeah.
Because it might be different between two high schools. At this point, we just have, there's a problem to solve. The nuances of that problem might need a bit more data.
On that particular subject, I think if we're looking at solutions to that, a good place to look or to question is to talk to our campus monitors on the high school level, because they're the ones who are there day to day and are dealing with what goes on, and they may have some insights into some of the things that might work,
Right.
especially those monitors that have been there for a long, long time and have seen the whole changing of the behaviors in the bathrooms to vaping and things like that.
Oh, no, that was it. And I feel like I was reading somewhere where we were doing something about drinking fountains and everything involving that as well too. Where are we? Cause there was something about clean drinking fountains in here. Did I make that up in my head?
No, it's there.
Okay, clean water fountains. I mean, everybody wants a clean water fountain. Usually, I mean, I don't use them at our elementary school because I see the other kids use them. And but is that something that we're putting in budget items? I know a lot of kids bring water bottles. Are we doing fill stations, things like that? And I'm sure this has been talked about. I just don't know. It seems like it was important enough to put down on here. So
It's something we have to look into because that was a surprise to us too.
like that's an interesting thing to kind of bubble up to the top, and if this is something that students really want, that's kind of and it would be good, right? So anyways,
That was one of those that, okay, we had
like,
to,
what's going on with the drinking
we have to
fountain?
investigate the drinking fountain.
Anyways, that's all I had. Thank you so much.
I wanted to just name, just before we end, that about math, because I know you know that it sounds like there's going to be some work being done, but I don't want us to gloss over that, because I do think that that's, we've seen that in the CASP data, we've seen that in assessments. We, I mean, I see it in my home, I mean, I think that it's a concern, I mean, I've had math tutors for my kids. Why? Right? We have great teachers. Is it just, I'm assuming I need them? I don't know, anyway, so I think that I just want to name it to make sure that we understand that that is something that we're looking deeply into, and we're not just pushing it aside.
As I said, with the resources we have, the reason why Ed Services felt we needed a dedicated person again, because you had a dedicated person before, is because we actually have to have eyes on in a really explicit way. We have to listen to our parents, our kids, and our teachers. And there's all kinds of different views about why this is a problem. And Debbie just said, give me a little bit more time. Debbie is our curriculum and instruction executive director. Just give me a little bit more time to kind of get regrouped here and focused. And so that is why I put a date of, the audit of things next year, but with some work starting right now.
Great. I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't just something that seemed like we were kind of pushing under the rug, and make sure that we named it. So
That whole topic, that situation of kids needing math tutors in high school was something, when I was on the math task force for Common Core, was something we really dove into, because there was a particular campus where when you weren't succeeding, you were told, get a tutor. And I remember the task force said, that's not acceptable. That's, our instruction is supposed to be meeting their needs.
Cindy's just giving us the time check.
Okay. And thanks for bringing that up, Laura, too, because I think we wouldn't want to have this whole meeting with that, because that's a big, optic out there right now as well too. And then maybe even when we do get some direction on like vision for that, I was just reading an article today. I can't remember what the underlying data was, but it said on average in California, students have lost about 5 months of progress in math. And I know that doesn't mean that it's our district, but in collective we've lost. So, and then also maybe in the vision is the vision to recover learning that's been lost, or just not, like what is the goal going to be, is to push that back and regain the time that's lost, regain the progress that's lost?
For kids, I truly believe as an educator that we can, the right instruction and the appropriate interventions, get kids to where they need to go.
That's awesome.
I am very confident of that, but we've got to be really precise.
Yeah.
And that's the support we need to provide. In the last 3 minutes, though, the only other question I have is, you saw our kind of analysis of where we wanted to shine some light in terms of going forward. Are there any other quick pieces of advice you have, because you feel we missed something? Again, so you gave me all kinds of ideas on how to do with what we kind of proposed. Is there anything you feel we missed? Because that would be the only thing that I would want to incorporate into our thinking.
And I'm sorry to jump in here. I don't want to.
You don't have to
speak, and
apologize.
I apologize. Yeah, I think there were so many great ideas that we came up with here, and some granular action steps. And I think there's so many good ideas. What I don't want to miss, and I took a bunch of notes, is what are next steps and action steps to take the vision and the hope of how to engage the community with actually some ideas on how I'm going to do that and how we can do that. So I think
the next spot.
Yeah.
Because there's a bunch of things that I said, December, September. The one that we will work on in January with a date for the 1st of February is, what does a intentional awareness engagement plan look like?
That's awesome.
That, what do, you know, what do we need from the board? What do we need from cabinet? What do we need from principals? That's gonna be our month of January. So that's the first thing. Because our goal is if everybody at least understands what we're talking about, we can have all kinds of conversations. Even if we disagree, it doesn't matter because we know what we're talking about. So that's first. Okay.
Okay, so we can adjourn.